Expired, Mr. Jeffries.
Thank the distinguished chair for holding this hearing, as well as the witnesses for your presence here today. Clearly, in the constitutional construct of this country, we've got an Article I legislative branch that I'm very proud to serve in, the Article II executive branch, the Article III judiciary, all apparently constructed to make sure that there are checks and balances, but also I think the framers of the Constitution recognize the importance of a free and fair press. It's in the First Amendment, the first decision made to amend the Constitution, recognizing that perhaps a fourth estate was also central to their vision as to what the democratic republic would look like were we able to keep it. So I just wanted to ask a few questions, and Ms. Oberlander, I'll start with you. Throughout your career, you've advised media companies and journalists, I believe, on the legal implications of reporting on matters of public concern and national security. Is that right?
Yes, that is.
And in your view, how has the government's use of what I would phrase secret subpoenas and gag orders threatened the ability of journalists to actually do their job?
So journalists who are afraid that they are being surveilled, or even that they have been surveilled in the past, or then it's very difficult to go and convince or talk to or be able to fairly represent to a source that they will try to maintain their confidentiality. It's quite chilling. I mean, some of it is on the source side, where they see that the journalists have been subject to subpoenas after the fact, and they said, I can't talk to you, and it makes it very, very challenging.
Is it fair to say that in providing information to the public, which is a great service that the media, the fourth estate, that journalists provide, that they often will rely on confidential sources? Is that right?
Yes, there's a lot of reporting, outside national security reporting, but also all sorts of other very important reporting that relies on confidential sources.
And can you elaborate on the importance of maintaining confidential sources without sort of this practice being chilled by an overbroad or overly aggressive Department of Justice utilizing these secret subpoenas to unroot these sources?
Yes, I mean, there is in our papers, in the testimony, you can look at all sorts of incredibly important stories of really national importance that were based on confidential sources. Some were in fact national security stories, but others were conditions at Walter Reed, levels of corruption in foreign governments. In fact, frankly, as a person who has worked at Univision, I can report that there's an awful lot of reporting about what's happening internationally with other governments, not the American government, where you have very, very important reporting coming through and where the sources are literally afraid for their lives. And so if you cannot maintain their confidentiality, if there's a risk that they're going to be disclosed, then they really are, they may be killed. They have very legitimate fears of retaliation. That, of course, fortunately, we tend not to have killed too many journalists or sources here that I'm aware of in the U.S., but it's definitely a big part of our reporting. Similarly, there have been much reporting about all sorts of fraud in H-2A visa applications, things that are relying on confidential sources, people who don't want to be disclosed because they may be here, they may be undocumented, but they still may be subjected to quite horrible conditions. The Enron reporting, the Balco reporting, and just now even the reporting about the tax filings of wealthy Americans.
Now, in justifying what some of us may characterize as overly aggressive and/or inappropriate behavior at times, Department of Justice or other governmental entities will sometimes cite national security. And that's a very broad phrase, and we certainly all are concerned about national security. But in your experience, can you just, in the final few moments that I've got, articulate whether that is being invoked in an overly broad fashion, and how might we think about viewing and balancing national security as a concern, but also allowing the free and fair press as vital to our democracy to also be able to thrive.
Time of
So,
the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
so there's a long-standing problem of overclassification of information in the country, and because of that, if a source discloses some information that is classified and maybe gives the government an opportunity to argue that the disclosure is a violation of one of the Secrecy Acts or the Espionage Act, you all of a sudden have a national security issue when really much of that information is not of that kind of importance where you would be disclosing something truly secret and dangerous to the country. And so one way of restricting it is to restrict the definition of national security in any of the statutes that we pass, in terms of what would qualify for an exception, and to narrow it maybe, as has been proposed, just to include terrorists and potential terrorist acts, a really dramatic issue, and not just a level of embarrassment to the government. That would be one approach.
Mr. Benz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank all of the witnesses for their